Welcome once again to the Unveiled podcast, and today something a little different. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Michael Strong. Michael Strong is founder of the Socratic Experience, a virtual school for children grades 3 to 12. He is one of the most experienced designers of innovative school programs in the United States. One of Michael's projects, Moreno Valley High School, a Paideia charter high school, was ranked the 36th best US public high school by Newsweek. More recently, he designed the original model for the Academy of Thought and Industry, the high school model for the largest Montessori network in the United States. He is the author of The Habit of Thought, From Socratic Seminars to Socratic Practice, and lead author of Be the Solution, How Entrepreneurs and Conscious Capitalists Can Solve All the World's Problems. Now, as you might imagine, today's conversation is about education. It's about how we teach our children to have inventive, debating thoughts. And ultimately, Michael and I discuss how we feel about the modern educational environment and how we feel about the potential replacements and what it is to train a society that has the capacity for intellectual debate and comprehensive thinking around topics. We also cover the consequences and what we are seeing as real-life impacts of the conventional educational system. Michael is a real pioneer in this field, and without further ado, let's just get to the interview. I hope that you really enjoyed this. Check out the show notes for all of the resources, the links to Michael's books and school, and then if you have any questions, please find him, follow him, and get in touch to ask about anything that you would like to in terms of reshaping and reimagining education. I'm really excited to welcome you to the Unveiled podcast, Michael. I think we're going to have a great conversation today, and I feel like it's a slightly different angle to what my listeners might be used to, which I'm really delighted by, because I feel like whilst we may be on different playing fields, we have a lot of shared ethoses, which I think is something that is great to get into. So welcome. And I'm going to begin with my big opening question of essentially, how do you serve?
Oh, beautiful. So I love learning and I love conversation and I love connection. And so I love creating warm, positive communities within which young people can learn.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So where should I go first? I mean, why? Like, why is this the thing for you? Why is this the important bit?
So I would say it's changed over the decades. I've been in education for 30 some years. To drill in a little bit, when I was in high school, I had a class where we would just talk about ideas. So we'd read Nietzsche, Buber, Plato, and talk about it. And I loved it. And it was a little bit like those films where it starts out in black and white and then it goes into color. All the other, classes seem boring after that. I love conversation, but I don't like being lectured at. And so I ended up going to a college, St. John's College, where for 4 years we just read and discuss ideas, no lectures. I'd actually gone to Harvard a year before that, but it was still lectures, famous people lecturing at me. So I transferred to St. John's. And this modality of thinking and talking about ideas, engagement and dialogue was so much fun that in graduate school, I got an opportunity to lead students in Chicago public schools doing this, and they loved it. It was like bringing kids to life. Later, I did this with some kids and said, I ended up having a career where I was leading dialogue in classrooms and ultimately creating schools based on dialogue in classrooms. But at one point, I had students who were juniors and seniors, and they had said it was the first time they had ever heard an adult listen to them. And teenagers, but still, they said, their parents, their teachers, their bosses, their ministers, they said nobody actually cared about what they think. And I don't teach, I ask questions. What is the truth, the good, the beautiful? How do you know? What do you know? How do you know when you're being manipulated? I love talking to people about ideas. And to get into a theme we'll get into later, not only is it intellectually stimulating, but it allows us to be engaged in serious learning while also connecting as human beings. And it's so much fun.
And is that why you think it's important? Because it does more than just like fill our brains with factoids. It actually is it the conversation? Is it a participatory thing? Why is it magical?
No, that's great. And I always say, I was straight A student, but it was memorize and forget. I'd load my brain with the facts on the test and spit them out. But I think I am an autodidact. I love to learn. I'm very capable at learning anything on my own. And but that's developed. So that's not a natural state for a 4-year-old or 10-year-old or 14-year-old or whatever. And so I see it as liberating. It liberates the intellect, but
Mm,
it also is validating. I have a YouTube channel called Socratic Michael Strong, and I have titled many of the videos "Loving Your Child's Mind." In
mm,
some ways, asking someone what they think and why. Some people feel challenged by it, oh, don't ask me questions. But part of it is, this is what I mean by creating a culture. If we create a culture where it's normal to wonder, what are you thinking, Victoria, and why, in a
mm,
respectful way, people love to be seen. And for somebody to care about what you believe and why, somebody to care about your ideas, I see it as a matter of deep respect. I've had many children say they feel more respected at my schools than they ever have in their life. And I
mm,
think being seen, being respected, being given a voice, also being challenged, so it's not just whatever you want. I think it's a really engaging, at one point a teacher said, "Is this the appropriate learning style for all kids?" I said, "Look at the cafeteria. Kids are talking. Human beings talk. That's what we do."
mm,
So to have a school based primarily on conversation, what's not to like? Intellectually stimulating, intellectually liberating. I train kids to learn how to learn, and they're healthy, well, and purpose driven. Voila.
mhm. It seems like a magic bullet, and it feels like, I mean, why do you think education isn't like this? Is it why we not? I mean, the way you've just presented it, any rational human would be like, of course, but it feels like the education system is stuck in the dark ages, and why do you think that is?
No, that's a great question. And going back, been some articles. There's a famous blog post last spring called "Why Don't We Have More Einsteins?" And there's another blog post on, how are amazing people educated? And a lot of it turned out people would have a rich environment at home, and they'd engage in conversations, and the child would read all the books in the library. So it was in some ways very unstructured. There may have been some tutoring,
Hmm.
but the top-down part did not exist. And historically, the Prussians developed kind of top-down, and it was very nationalistic. They wanted, the Prussian armies to win. And so the Prussians in the late 18th, early 19th century developed a top-down system, which then Horace Mann brought to the United States. And, I can be sympathetic and compassionate, and sometimes I'm not. But the sympathetic version is we want to educate all kids, public school dream. But it
Mm,
was also at the time to control what they explicitly called in Massachusetts the dirty Catholics from Ireland that were coming in.
mm,
And so there is this kind of, I would say, unhealthy combination of let's help all kids and let's control things from the top down. And I think that control from the top down completely poisons the system.
mm. I was listening to an audio yesterday, actually a Gene Keys audio. I don't know if you've heard of the Gene Keys, but I was listening to it, and it was talking about the thing that we're afraid of is anarchy. We're afraid of what human beings left free to be themselves would do. And it's like, I was thinking to myself, it feels like such a silly thing to be scared of. It's just like, we're all humans here, right? So, like, maybe just what you would do, like actually having this kind of freedom of, especially thought. And I think that ability to have just cognitive exploration feels
Mhm.
like, I get excited when I sit down with my multidisciplinary medical team and I'm like, we geek out on stuff because it's like sparky ideas. But in silos, it feels like that doesn't happen. And I
So
guess, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
no, that's fine. So I'm of course very passionate about intellectual freedom as well and freedom in general.
Mm,
And part of it too is this, I would say, concern about accountability. So even within public schools, 40 years ago, teachers had a lot of autonomy, and they
mhm,
could, spend an afternoon, talking about ideas or politics or history and engaging in conversation. And
mm,
some teachers still do, but the accountability movement from the 1980s onward finally culminating in No Child Left Behind, the early aughts.
yep.
That's created this heavy top-down control that has teachers are complaining. Many teachers are unhappy because they don't have the autonomy. And so it is a control system. And I
Mm,
think ultimately the control, we do need to let go of control. People need to respect boundaries and not harm each other, of
mhm,
course. But beyond that, I'm very much in favor of freedom and letting people go in different directions and discover different things and families and subcultures. And I'm very radical in that way. Let's let 1,000 different subcultures bloom. And yeah, if somebody's actively harmful, we can address it. But beyond that,
Mhm.
I'm pretty much let's be very free.
Mhm. And what do you see as the consequence of not being free, of the system that we have at this moment in time?
So many different dimensions of that, but
Mm.
I'll go into one. So Dan Pink, Drive, about human motivation,
Mhm.
talks about how motivation comes from autonomy, purpose, and competency.
Mhm.
And sometimes other people appropriately add relationship. And
Mm.
so if you have, if you have purpose is really key. What am I doing and why? Where am I going? That's really important. And if somebody else is controlling, we usually are not motivated by someone else. We all have our own individual purposes. Some of my students want to be creatives, want to be entrepreneurs, some want to be intellectuals, but we allow students and respect their own purpose rather
Mm.
than our what we think our purpose is.
Mhm.
And then with respect to autonomy, yeah, even if we share a purpose, you may want to do it this way, I may want to do it that way. And so there's a real, I think, human need. Play, octopi are the most intelligent invertebrates, and octopi play. I think play is essential for um, health, basically. We'll kind of get into that a little bit. So we
Mm.
need to play, we need to experiment. Play is essential for innovation and creativity and entrepreneurship. So we've got the purpose, we've got the autonomy that allows us to find what's the right path for us. Competence, you don't want to be too hard, too easy. It needs to be right where we feel challenged, engage in, just the right amount of challenge for us. And that has to
Mhm.
be very individual. And then, yeah, I think relationship is, so those three give us the motivation, and they think relationship is part of that. If we're in a culture where people like and respect and care about who we are and what we're doing, we're going to be more motivated. All of this leads, again, to adolescent well-being. I
Mm.
think if we don't do that, if we have a top-down system that does not support or encourage them to have a purpose, that does not give them autonomy, that does not support, is one size fits all and doesn't allow them all to feel competent, and ultimately, it also doesn't give them a chance to connect adequately with healthy relationships and
Mm.
community. Then you get all kinds of pathologies. I think
Mhm.
adolescent dysfunction, including the epidemic of adolescent mental illness, where we see is exacerbated by social media for sure. But I think it's ultimately caused by top-down, one-size-fits-all schooling. And
Mhm.
the recent burst due to social media is just an exaggeration of decades of previous trends.
Mm. Yeah, it feels quite damning. I don't know how hopeful you feel about any of this, but I feel when I look at the education systems, and they really are like institutions. And I'm from the UK. We have really good education there. It is high quality from the perspective of intellectual, not from the perspective of it being good, like maturation of humans. It's good for maturation of bright people who can have an intellectual argument, maybe. But even then, it's not necessarily argumentation in a good way, debate until you get to potentially university level. But it feels like this stuff is baked in, and I wonder what your hopefulness is about any of the potentials for the future.
So I'm by nature very optimistic, and I'm also engaged in doing things. Again, agency. I have a very strong sense of personal agency. Um, and there are some hopeful things in the UK, but I'll focus on the US.
Mm.
So for me, Arizona last fall passed a universal educational scholarship account program where all 1.1 million students in Arizona now can use state funds, $7,500 per pupil, to have whatever education they want. They can unschool, self-directed education, alternative education, homeschool, micro school, whatever they want. West Virginia, Iowa, Utah, Arkansas, Florida have all passed similar legislation, and there are 6 to 10 states on the way. So in a very period of time, millions, tens of millions of students are going to have the opportunity to seek other kinds of education if they so choose. And
Mm.
there are many thousands of innovative educational providers providing that. So you're absolutely right. I think the system is stuck, but creative destruction, we're providing an accelerating number of options for kids to find meaningful, purpose-driven education, and it's very exciting.
Mm. And do you see, like, almost it doesn't matter how you break out the system, just break out the system. So whether it's Steiner School or Waldorf or whatever it is, just do something different as anything good? Or do you feel like there's a real need to create a different system?
No, well, I am pluralistic. I would say purpose and community. I think well-being, purpose, community, those features, autonomy, competency, those sorts of things are
Mm.
essential. But within that, I'm very in favor of what I think of as a family of agency-driven educational models. Montessori is, of course, the oldest one.
Yeah.
Montessori gives students a lot of agency.
Hmm.
But more recently, there are acting academies, there's Sudbury's, there's Prinda, there's the Socratic Experience, my program. There's Synthesis. There are a blossoming number. There are lots of entrepreneurs who are moving in
Hmm.
this direction, and educators. A lot of them are educators starting micro schools. I think a
Mm.
lot of educators inherently know that, and so there are tweaks to the model. Waldorf is interesting in a different way. It's very warm and community driven, a little bit less agency.
Right.
So and I think ultimately some of this is every child. When I first got into education, I thought they all need my system. But over time, I thought if a family had 10 children, maybe they need 10 different schools.
Sure.
Children are so different. You
Yeah.
know, um, you know, with respect to people ask, what's the right education system? And I ask, what's the right food or eating system? Well, we've
Yeah.
got gourmet restaurants, vegan restaurants, McDonald's, fast
Hmm.
food, grow your own,
Yeah.
home cooking. There are so many different ways to feed ourselves, different grocery stores, Whole Foods, HEB. What's the right way to eat? Well, sometimes I grab something from the convenience store. Sometimes I go to the gourmet place. Sometimes I grow my own food and eat it at home.
Hmm.
So much diversity. And human beings, our minds are even more diverse than our stomachs, so
Mm.
or our palates. So yeah, radical diversity.
Right. I love that. And I love, I've had many conversations today, and everyone I've spoken to today has been very kind of egalitarian. It's been very, there isn't a one way. There's a different comfort level per, individual with the system or the approach that is being offered. And I feel like the more people that we can have who really don't, yes, of course, believe wholeheartedly in their model, but also recognize the value of other models, I think it's just universally better on the whole. Um,
Huge,
yeah.
huge. And whatever it is, I like, what's the right website on the internet? That's ridiculous. I probably visit 1,000 websites every week, maybe every
Yeah.
day.
Right.
All that stuff, all ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, however, we have you here. So I'm going to dig into your method because I want to know more. So I'm going to do the exploration of terminology question first. So the
Mhm.
Socratic experience, why? What are we talking about? I'm going to assume we're in Socrates. Explain to my listeners and to me why the choice of this and what it really means to you.
Absolutely. So there are various levels. So Socrates famously, people call him a philosopher, but he was simply a guy who walked around Athens, asked them questions: what is true, what is just, and these sorts of things. And he was put to death allegedly for not believing in the gods of the state and for corrupting the young. But what that was he was asking powerful people questions that they couldn't answer
Mm,
coherently, and he drove them to think about everything more deeply.
mm,
Alfred North Whitehead, the philosopher in math and philosophy, maybe seen as the footnotes to Plato. I would say
mm,
all of Western intellectual life we see as a series of extensions of Socratic dialogue.
mm,
Why is this true is science? Why is this good is morality and political theory.
mm,
What is noble is kind of aesthetics and art and so forth. So on and on and on. So that's one layer. Another
mm,
layer is often people think of Socrates as very rational, but in the Platonic dialogues, they often end up kind of, what does my conscience say? It's a little bit mystical. So
mm,
after we discuss our different perspectives, it helps us clarify who we are and why, what our convictions are. I think that relates to purpose because as young people sort through different perspectives in a mutually respectful environment, they develop clearer convictions, become more purpose driven, no longer a candle in the wind where every opinion
mm,
backs up. So very powerful kind of moral spiritual development there.
mm,
Then Also, of course, dialogue, the human connection. It's fun to talk, as I've already mentioned.
Mm.
Uh, there's also another dimension of learning to think conceptually, and this is kind of career track, which may sound, you know, not obvious, but I have a friend who is one of the leading software trainers in the United States, and he says half of software training is, learning to code, but the other half is communication.
Mm.
And communication. But in order for us to communicate well, I need to have a mental model of what's going on inside in your mind. You need to have a mental model of what's going on in my mind.
Mhm.
And we need to be able to be flexible about constructing these mental models, understanding concepts. And so I actually see this, especially in the world of AI, kind of a lot of talk about that. It's very helpful for us to learn how to understand each other and our ideas really well. So
Mhm.
we sit in a group and talk about ideas, and while we're having a conversation, I need to understand my ideas, the text in front of me, your ideas, all the other ideas, how they relate to each other, very cognitively challenging.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then to give you an example, I've got a girl on my Socratic Michael Strong YouTube channel. I began having these conversations with her when she was 4. She's now 10, and she and another 10-year-old are working through a college level Python course pretty much on their own with occasional tutor helping because they're used to thinking and talking about ideas. Oh,
Mm.
what is a loop? How does the loop work? So, we connect, we understand, know thyself, ourselves more deeply, the personal conviction thing, while
Mhm.
learning how to learn and having fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. It feels like what you've just described is the cure for the divisiveness that's happening in the world right now. It's like the ability to contemplate someone else's perspective and how that fits with your own, and almost not have it as a competition because it starts so young that it becomes just a natural part of the way your brain gets matured, I guess.
Brilliant. Thank you. One of the reasons I talk about habituation and enculturation is I want to create a culture. I actually, vastly going back to the debate, I really prefer the term dialogue to either debate or discussion,
Hmm.
because connotations of debate or discussion is right, we're going to kind of beat each other up with our ideas. Whereas
Right.
dialogue is mutual understanding. We can disagree and we can be very clear about why we disagree.
Mm.
But also, I always like to get inside the mind of somebody else. Wow, even if they have different premises about life, that's interesting. You
Hmm.
believe that? Really? And if you believe that, then what happens?
Mm.
It's very powerful. At one point, I have a rubric. I have a book, The Habit of Thought,
Hmm.
that is about how I do my Socratic practice. And
Mm.
in the bit back of the book is an appendix which has a 10 point rubric to evaluate the quality of conversations.
Mm.
At one point, I invited some female, it just happened to be female business people, to evaluate a group at the beginning of the semester and at the end. And at the end, and this was middle school, the evaluators were so impressed because I had trained the kids to have civilized, respectful dialogue on
Mm.
complex subjects. And once one gets used to this, almost every business meeting, certainly every political debate, is a nightmare. People are like all over the place, and you get it.
I do. Yeah. I have two questions that are kind of splitting me in different directions. One is like, how young are you starting with your method? Like, how you just mentioned someone who's 4, like that feels very young, but maybe that's just my narrow-mindedness. Like, how young?
Well, one of the reasons I like to point this out is often people think, oh yeah, junior students and seniors are college students, but not younger. I worked in a Montessori. I'm very connected to the Montessori movement,
Mm.
and many people see my approach as an appropriate secondary school sequel to Montessori. So
Sure.
years ago, I worked in a Montessori school where I would go into classrooms with 3 and 4-year-olds, and
Mm.
I would say it's an art. Often I say what I do for a long time is simply person A speaks, person B listens and responds.
Hmm.
Sounds simple. You and I are doing just fine at it.
Right.
But with a 3-year-old, with a 4-year-old, it's an
Yes. Yes. Yes.
achievement. But
Right.
that's going back to your point about, yeah, habituation and culturation. That's how, if they start doing that when they're 3 or 4, if that's being modeled for them, by the time they're 6 or 7, they can actually have a pretty sophisticated dialogue.
Right.
And so everything, we're children are sponges. And
Mm,
if we interact, as an aside, there's a whole literature on how homes in which there's a lot of conversation with children gives children a lifelong academic edge.
mm,
And it's talk in general, but also going back and forth. And then if one adds, kind of asking these conceptual questions,
mm,
be an example of a question I asked a very young, I think I asked Lano this, she might have been 5 rather than 4, but I said, what is a bird? And, birds fly. And they say, well, airplanes fly. Are airplanes and bird the same thing? And she had to stop and think but no, they're not the same thing, but they both
mhm,
fly, and
mm,
so very simple, but that sort of juxtaposition of ideas.
mm.
Give you one more, something I've done with many groups of 5-year-olds is I have a list of 4 statements. My name is myself, my body is myself, my mind is myself, my spirit is myself, or my soul. And a lot of times the kids initially, my body is myself, this is me. And then there'll always be a kid, oh no, my name is myself. And then no, if my name changes, I'm still me. No, my body is myself. And then
Mhm.
so you get into these things. And yeah, even at 5,
Yeah.
kids were thinking about that. It's again so much fun.
Yeah, and also just I think one of the things that I feel it does is I do a lot of work with adults who I'm doing inner child work with. I'm basically doing this reparenting, what needs weren't met when you were a kid. And this element of like, I care whether you think it's your body, your mind, your soul, or your name. I actually let's talk about it. I want to know, especially from an adult in a like a teaching capacity, and then from your peer group. It feels like that almost as powerful a tool in this. It feels like it's kind of reinforcing the you are valued, you are loved, we care, we are meeting your needs, we want to know what you think almost.
Huge. One of the things that, although I went to a college where for 4 years we had dialogue, it was very much intellectualized.
Mm,
When early in my career in the classroom, I had the benefit of working with somebody who did have a background in group therapy.
mm,
And he paid much more attention to the social dynamics than is
yeah.
usually done at intellectual
Hmm.
institutions.
Hmm.
And so I would say I've been very influenced by the Rogerian tradition of therapy,
Yeah.
uh,
Hmm.
and also Martin Buber. I'm a big fan of Buber and I and
Yep.
thou and treating
Yep.
each other in that manner. And
Hmm.
one of the things we do concretely is at the end of conversations, we debrief about the interpersonal dynamic, because one of the biggest ways, I make it all sound like easy and fun, but one of the biggest ways this becomes dysfunctional, and we've probably all had college classes like this, is a few students dominate, or there's a
Yeah.
subtle kind of aggression, insult, there are all kinds of um, less than optimal energetic interactions.
Mm,
So at one point I was doing this for adults, and I had an artist visit one of my classes, and she drew a really cool diagram. Everybody's in a circle, all these round heads, and she would show like, oh, there's a romantic connection there, and this person's angry, and this person's really curious, and this person is all protective. And just paying attention to the emotional dynamic of a group
hmm.
has really critical, and I would say distinctive in the practice, the way I do it. And I call it a Socratic practice. And that's
Mm,
important to differentiate it from the kind of paper chase law school, we're going to humiliate you with hard questions.
yeah.
So it's actually very important that we pay attention to the interpersonal dynamic. And sometimes if there is, an act of social aggression in the middle of a class, things aren't going, we'll just pause the intellectual stuff and say, hey, it feels like there's a tension here. Are you feeling it? Am I correct? What's going on? And
Yeah.
just create space and make it okay to talk about the interpersonal dynamic.
Mm,
Um, Sometimes we do readings on various aspects of group dynamics, group process. And I
mm,
would say fairly gendered. Often even young middle school girls can become very sophisticated at talking about group dynamic once
yeah.
one gives them language and permission, and we can talk about what's going on here.
Yeah.
Again, you'd love it.
It's interesting. It's interesting if you're training that skill that young, because as a coach, as someone who does group coaching, the art of tracking the nervous systems and the dynamics and the interplay in a group it's a skill that you really have to learn and you have to develop. And I didn't learn it when I was a child. I just exploded bombs everywhere when I was a teenager. I thought that was the way that teenagers were supposed to be, surely. But I certainly wasn't sensitive. I wasn't sensitive in a like, let's pay attention to this way to a group dynamic. I'd just feel it and react, and that would be my way. But it feels like, if as part of an educational model you're also encouraging attention to the subtle cues of humanness, that feels like a an almost like a massive up level from skills.
Very, very much so. And just to go in perhaps an unexpected direction, I have a friend who's a neuroscientist who created a device where we can put a Fitbit on our wrists, and it measures psychological safety and engagement.
Hmm.
So objectively. And so one of the things we played with, so we are very attentive, through old-fashioned methods, but it's also great to actually see, oh, when I do that, and for kids, it really helps them to see, oh, when I do that, that makes that person feel unsafe. Or when I
Mm,
talk this way, nobody is engaged, but I talk in that way, people are engaged.
mm.
So I'm very interested in, I call it tech optimized human interactions, where in
Yeah,
addition to calling attention to this, giving people tools, it's sort of a form of social biofeedback where,
yeah,
again, everything is gamified. Why just have the kind of first person shooter experience be gamified, which I hate, by the way? Why
right.
not have a community and connection
Yeah.
be conscious, deliberate, and sometimes gamified, sometimes just, a real experience?
Yeah, and I think that the more biofeedback things we can have, the more aware we can become of the thing that should be obvious but sometimes isn't. It's exactly what we do with health tech devices. It's like, you're so unconscious of this thing that sits in the background of your life all the time. How about we just put attention to it, and it changes behavior? It automatically changes behavior.
Huge. There's another product that we've used where it measures, it's a Zoom call, it measures interruptions, dominance, and influence in a conversation.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's real time. And so you can see, oh, wow, this person is dominating, and also afterwards. So it's exactly what you see. And,
Mm,
part of my dream is to integrate these various tools that are mostly fairly new,
mhm.
so that we can have a really great system for having people develop. I'm sure you're aware of that research at Google where the most effective teams were not necessarily the super geeks, but they're really effective at working together. The whole
Yeah.
thing of soft skills, Jeff Weiner, who, former president, now chairman of LinkedIn, said the soft skills gap is the biggest gap in the
Hmm.
US today. People are aware
Mm,
of the tech gap, but especially as AI takes off, I think
hmm.
sophistication and human interaction is going to be one of the most important skills to develop. And right
Oh,
now,
for
most
sure.
of our tools are dreadful for doing so.
Yes, and it's funny that, and you speak about building a culture, and like, we have a really strong attempt to build a culture here where I work, and it feels like, why is this so hard? Like, when did we forget that we were human beings, and more specifically, human beings, not human doings, and we're not trying to impress each other by like how much we do. It's like considering your fellow man and like having that generosity of spirit of like, you are all in this together. It kind of feels like we shouldn't have to educate this stuff, but something about our modern world seems to have got so far away from it.
Of course. And, there are situations where you just got to be working all the time, nose to the grindstone. And I think too many people are in too much of that. So it would take a long distraction to talk about how we've gotten there. But I think now we're in a place where the working together, one of my other themes is life's too short to work with jerks. I think we're at a place where the quality of our experiences at work, at home, in school, I'm a big believer in the experience economy. So in some ways, we're coming out of a kind of product consumption society where
Hmm.
most middle class and up people have more stuff in the garage than they'll ever, more clothes in the closet. Most people have more than enough stuff. What
Yeah.
we now want are higher quality experiences.
Mm.
And I think the big wins in the 21st century economy will be those people in education, in healthcare, certainly in every workplace where, and entertainment as well, where it's really high quality experiences. So to jump ahead to my dream is that we all 8 billion of us are waking up every day engaged in flow experiences, making the world a better place, and doing what we love, loving what we do. And it's all beautiful. And of course, how we get there, lots of work, but I think more of us are having a good time at work. You're tired. It's okay to be tired, but enjoying it. And if we enjoy it, we're energized. Where people don't enjoy what they're doing, if they don't enjoy the interactions, then they're drained. And so the fundamental thing is, how many moments in our life do we enjoy? So I think we we need to move towards that world. And the more people we can get going and excited about the path, faster it'll happen.
Mm-hmm. I it's our tagline here at Kuya we tell people that we can help you claim a life you love. So we are definitely on the same page with like everything that we're thinking. I'm really intrigued. Like, we've spoken about adolescent education and the educational establishment and all that kind of stuff. Like, as adults, if we didn't get this like beautiful upbringing, where do we start? Do we just buy your book and read and like look at the technique? Like, how do we start to develop this willingness to question and have curiosity and open our minds? How do we even begin?
No, that's a great question. So first, I do think that standard education, John Taylor Gatto was New York State Teacher of the Year. And when he was given that award, he said, "I quit." And he went on to write books that were very critical of the education system for training us to be passive and dependent. We are trained to be emotionally dependent and intellectually dependent. Does the teacher approve? I have to raise my hand. Can I get a bathroom pass? Am I a good student or a bad student? Our whole identity is formed there. So I think the first thing to realize is that I'm very big on talking to people about diverse kinds of genius. I think there are 8 billion kinds of genius. Our role as parents and educators is to help everyone identify their own genius and develop it. And as an adult, you can still believe in yourself, but are you actually empathetic or funny or thoughtful, or do you love beauty? Whatever it is, I think people do need to. I've had people riff off my work in terms of love yourself. And really think about what ways you have something that you would like to share with the world. And the other thing is community, where there's an old cliche, we're an average of 5 people we spend the most time with. I'm very intentional about who I'm spending time with. That includes, of course, online culture, but also relationships. Do your 5 closest relationships give you energy? Do they support you in developing and growing as a human being? Or do they crush you? When you're scrolling online, are you scrolling content that enlarges you and gives you more optimism, power, and purpose? Or are you reading stuff that manipulates you and puts you in a state of fear, anger, and outrage all the time?
Back to those first-person shooter games.
Exactly. Or most of, political outrage porn, I call it. Most media headlines on both the left and the right are just outrage porn all day. The more they can get people outraged, the more you click, and you have to realize you're being manipulated. And so we need to kind of take control of our lives. I'm very careful, and after a certain point in the evening, I don't touch social media, and before a certain point in the morning, I don't touch it. And so I think we need to create space for ourselves, our conversations, be intentional about everything. And if somebody is not feeling strong and confident, they need to do whatever it takes. And it's incremental, tiny, tiny bits. Improve this relationship, more of that one, less of that one. And yes, read personal growth therapy, whatever it takes. Literature, beauty, for me, my religion is the pursuit of the true, the good, and the beautiful. So pursue truth, pursue goodness, pursue beauty in whatever manifestation, and have fun while doing it. And I think if people give themselves permission to do that, then bit by bit, purpose and community, they'll get there.
I love that. I feel like, yes, it might be incremental, and yes, it might feel big, but it's also easy steps. Like, this isn't, build the Sistine Chapel. It's like, just like find a bit of curiosity, like find a bit of joy, find a bit of fun, evaluate your friendships, and, evaluate yourself, I think, as well.
Yeah, and just because I do think the social media thing is so big, click on this link rather than that link. The social media gives what you tell it to give you. And because I have such a taste for beauty in particular, I think beauty is very nourishing.
Mm.
I post on diverse kinds of beauty and optimism on my
Mm.
Facebook feed, and it feeds me beauty and optimism all day long. But if
Right.
you look at somebody else's Facebook feed, it's anger and nihilism all the
And
time.
vitriol. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So,
And yeah, I haven't spoken about social media much on this podcast. We are on social media. We rarely post anything. Um, by we, I mean the podcast. The company that I work at, we actively do not use social media. We have made the very strong decision not to play in the attention extraction economy. And it's like, it's the stupidest marketing move in the world, because we could, I mean, our CEO is a marketing genius and could probably hack Instagram in like 0.01 nanoseconds. However, it's like, we know that we don't, it's not a fair playing field, and you're competing against people's weaknesses right now. And what I love about what you've been saying is like, you can train yourself not to be a victim of the algorithms. You can train your algorithms to stoke what you really want, but you can also train your critical mind to have the perspective to reject the obvious, reject the sort of like what seems to be the dominant theme, if it's something that you really want to choose to do.
huge, and a lot of this comes down to getting a stronger sense of self. And I
Self.
think I would say I was very fortunate in all kinds of ways, but I have a sufficiently strong sense of self. I don't feel threatened by any of it, and I feel
Mm,
completely in command of all of it. And I've also had therapy and meditation, and
mm,
good people in my lives, and so many good things. But
mm,
I think when I see people who are not loving their life, a lot of times they haven't had, their self has not been nourished to have a voice and
mhm,
to develop itself. And so going back to those people who are not yet there, that's why it's so important. Often when I begin working with people as an educator, I
mm,
encourage, even young people, is this person helping you feel stronger or not? And even children in elementary school can choose, I'm going to have less of that friendship and more of that friendship.
mm,
The people you're around are just so critical, and
mm,
wrong people can drain us and even
mm,
damage us so
mm,
badly.
mm. It feels like the more I feel into like everything I do from a healthcare perspective, the more that I've listened to what you speak, it's like we always get back to the same perspective, which is you're you are enhanced and uplifted by what is around you, and the people are a big part of that. I think nature is a huge part of that as well, and having the ability to be in nature.
Mhm.
And I think that we need to pay more attention to our environments, and by that I mean every ingredient that feeds us. Like, we talk about the exosome as in everything that's outside of you, and like the epigenetics, which is all of the multiple factors that can affect your health. And it's like, our brains are inside our head, and they're a really powerful tool, an ally, or they're a really powerful negative like thing at the end of the day. And we require help. Like, we don't need to live in a vacuum. We require other people to be our supporters in this.
Huge. So I teach a purpose class to our students, and it's
Mm,
just half an hour a day. We talk about, what do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? And what will the world pay for? But we also talk about, health basics, get enough sleep, eat well.
mm,
But then finally, this intentionality about social experience. And I think
mm.
in some ways, we use Andrew Huberman's podcast
Yeah.
as part of our content. He's great. But part of this is, in some ways, health is very simple, but our society has made it very difficult. And
Right.
that's why I think we need, as individuals and in kind of maybe tiny clusters of like-minded people, to kind of take back our opportunity for well-being
Mm,
and then pursue it.
mm,
And if I think those of us who want to help other people,
mm,
often if people are tired and angry, they're emotionally reactive. One of the reasons I'm very um, happy to have had lots of meditation and therapy is not being emotionally reactive is super important.
yeah.
But I think that if we can help other people kind of escape these sorts of things, we are giving
Mm,
them strength. One of the reasons I'm so optimistic is that things can go in a downward spiral or an upward spiral.
mhm,
You need to kind of shift the enculturation of more people towards an upward spiral.
mhm,
Uh, I have a friend, John Hagel, who used to do innovation for Deloitte, and he talks about moving from uh, fear-based narratives to opportunity-based narratives.
yeah.
And I think so many people are locked in the fear-based. Let's go to the opportunity-based narrative, have people that support it. voila.
That's awesome. I love your optimism. It's really made me it's uplifted the end of my day. It's been a very long day, and I'm kind of like, oh, I'm excited about the potential of the world again, which is very
Wow.
cool.
Well,
Yeah.
but this is exactly how it works, with everybody. It's so simple, and it's habits. I'm very big on habits because
Hmm.
if we're in the habit of complaining all the time and then we get in a downward spiral, let's complain together.
Right.
Or if
Right.
we're, something we also do, a lot of workplaces, elementary schools do it, is appreciations on Fridays,
Hmm.
but very few secondary schools do appreciations. And initially the kids think it's corny. Oh, appreciations. But no, let's just appreciate the beauty, the joy, the kindness, whatever it is. Mom and
Hmm.
dad, the book I'm reading, whatever it is.
Hmm.
I'm sure gratitude is the foundation of happiness. And so
Hmm.
in the habit of being grateful, life is so much better.
Right. We start every single one of our meetings here with like A pluses, like what's good, what's good right now. And then we also shout out another member of our team, and we're like, we give praise and we thank the other people who've done amazing jobs. And it started with just this is good for me. And a couple of us were like, I kind of want to like big up everyone else as well. So I feel like there's a kind of a 5-minute appreciation society at the beginning of every meeting, which feels very nourishing to me anyway. So yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
of course.
Oh, I mean, I've loved speaking to you. Is there anything that I haven't asked? Anything else that you'd like to talk about? Any comments that you'd like to make? Any area you feel we haven't explored today?
I think at a high level, we're there. I would say that, we have a school for grades 3 through 12, virtual school. I also have helped other people create schools. I always want to support aligned people. So if anyone is passionate about this, again, we need to work together. And so
Hmm.
whatever we can do to create a world in which this way of life becomes easier rather than more difficult.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think a lot of people, we have so much wealth and leisure in our society. Yes, many people are suffering for sure, not denying that. But as a society, I know so many professionals, and a lot of systems don't encourage purpose and community. And so I
Mm.
think for all those people who have some extra energy they could give of some kind, um, find find some kind of community or venue for
Hmm.
channeling your natural desire for connection and purpose.
Hmm.
And that's how we're going to get out of all the problems we have is
Mm.
to be connected like this. So I would just encourage, I'm super busy, but if education is your thing, please reach out to me.
Right.
If something else is your thing, reach out to you. But let's build this energy is basically what I
And
would
I
say.
will make sure all of the links to find you are in our show notes, because I know that I have listeners who are searching for the alternatives actually. And I think, our listenership, because of who I am, spans America and the UK. And there is this I think the homeschool, like micro school thing is much more common here. Although I think there are movements in the UK, but I feel like there's just the lack of sufficient alternatives seems to be one of the things that I've heard a few times. And what I love about your openness to maybe explore with people or help people build schools, or also your school, we will put the links in the show notes. It feels like there are alternatives, and we just need to open our eyes and be, instead of frustrated at the system, just recognize that we're not going to fix the system from within it. So we need to build these mm, towers of alternatives elsewhere, and people will come.
Absolutely. Since you have a UK audience, there are two people I'm tracking in the UK whom I respect a great deal. One is Naomi Fisher, who is a therapist, and she's very active. She writes Substack, very active on social media. She's
Mhm.
very articulate about how often when children are unhappy, it's the school and not the child. So
Mhm.
don't blame the child. See if
Mhm.
there's something that you can change about the school environment. So Naomi
Mhm.
Fisher's great. The other is James Mannion. He co-wrote, sorry, I can't remember the author, but he wrote a book called Fear is a Mind Killer. And he's very
Mhm.
active in education reform in the UK. He hosted a conference last fall. But if you think about the basic message, fear is a mind killer. If
Mhm.
you are anxious about bullying or any kind of fear, and classrooms are full of so much fear for so many students, of
Mm.
course they're not going to go learn. So,
Right.
I'm talking about it, but part of that is I think people underestimate the extent to which fear and anxiety and often even humiliation undermine learning in
Mm.
standard. So, a couple of data points: 75% of high school students in the United States are unhappy. Yeah, it's tragic. 2/3 are not engaged in learning. People call attention to social media, but there's also the epidemic of depression,
Yeah.
suicide, and so forth. And I connected, in addition to social media, to the fact it's unimaginable that we have a system where 3 out of every 4 students is miserable every day, and they're pickled with misery. I'm not too afraid of this or that, exposure of a student, but if they're day in, day out, miserable and unhappy, it's not good.
Yeah.
So, quick note on the mental health thing too. Students who feel connected at school, where they feel that somebody cares about them, are half as likely to commit suicide as students who don't feel as if somebody cares about them. And I thought, for all this German about social media, can we not have schools where every child feels that somebody cares about them?
Right.
It's magic, this is so part of my fury, I would say, about the accountability movement in education is we're so worried about test scores. What if we had every child felt cared about?
Right.
Uh,
Well, and the stupid thing is, what really frustrates me is their test scores would go up if they felt cared about. Like, you would actually get the thing that you want and the thing that you're measuring. So it feels like, I get frustrated too, especially when it seems so damn obvious. I will make sure I tag those UK people in the show notes so that people can find those people too and actually, get involved. And, I really love what you said about the spare energy that some of us will have. It's like, yeah, there are people who are super busy, like yourself and myself. We're like furiously busy, and there isn't. But people do have spare energy. People do need a purpose as well. And I feel like supporting the broadening of human beings, whether we are talking about adolescents or just like changing the way you have conversations with your adult friends, I feel that's a very worthwhile investment of energy.
yeah. So instead of doom scrolling,
Yes, no more doom
optimism.
scrolling.
Exactly.
And if you
So,
do want to doom scroll, like, we're going to change it to optimism scroll because you have to stack your algorithm feed to make it optimism scroll, not doom scroll. That feels like
exactly.
awesome. Oh, thank you so much for spending time with me today, Michael. I've loved chatting to you and getting sort of more familiar with what you do. I will put everything in the show notes. Is there anything else you would like to say before we end our conversation for today?
No, just I want everybody to be grateful and love life.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you for being on the Unveil podcast.
Thank you, Victoria. Bye-bye.
I hope that you enjoyed that episode with Michael Strong. Please check out the show notes for all of the links that you need that were mentioned in today's episode. This is a really interesting topic and one that I want to get more into. So if you have any questions, any guest ideas, do get in touch with me, podcast@unveilenterprises.com. And for now, that's it for this week. I look forward to seeing you next week on the Unveil podcast.